Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Sidak Atnakistan, Sidak Stephanie Carroll, Tishusta, Sandak Naltin. So on behalf of the Indigenous Data Exchange, the Collaboratory for Indigenous Data Governance, Indigelab Network, the Indigenous Data Law Lab at NYU, and the Indigenous Data Alliance, welcome. So I'm joining you here from the homelands of the Author. I'm also currently home to the Yaqui peoples in Tucson or Tucson, Arizona. And we're really excited to welcome Leasi Vanessa Lee Raymond to host a discussion today. This webinar is supported by the by the United States National Science Foundation funded Indigenous Data Exchange. So the Indigenous Data Exchange really leverages and supports the existing Indigenous data sovereignty and governance networks' ongoing efforts, both to advance policy and practice and to create and share tools for the governance of Indigenous data. So Tanan, to all of you, thank you for joining us. We do invite you to watch our previous webinars at the Collaboratory for Indigenous Data Governance website. That link will be in the chat. This will be our last webinar for a few months and we'll resume again in September. We loosely follow a US academic calendar over here. We will be recording this webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the chat for our discussion at the end. And a huge thank you to our behind the scenes folks, Andrew Martinez, Riley Teitingfong, and Jewel Cummins. At this point, I'll hand over to Leasi Vanessa Lee Raymond to begin with our content.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to the organizers. So the topic for today is intelligence in motion. We've always transported intelligence as Indigenous people. It's moved with us. It's been a lived and embodied type of knowledge. And as we do that, right, we've also shared with each other. We've traveled and we've observed, we've been in other people's lands and brought things back. In the noise of AI and tech and data that's kind of happening today and has been happening, I guess, most of my life, I'm really eager to take a minute together to examine what we're building and how we're sharing and on whose terms. Something I've struggled with in my journey is feeling like we forgot how to share with each other. And I often find myself asking, like, and maybe this is a very Samoan question, but like, what's the protocol for this? Like, what's the proper way to receive this gift or give a gift? And so, I feel like there's been a lot of focus on what's been taken from us. And obviously we always need to think about that and who has taken from us. But I love this opportunity today to share and to explore the lost art of exchanging knowledge with each other. So I jump at any chance to rebuild and refine ways of sharing, learning, and helping each other. And so that's really the intention for this workshop. This is not a, unless you want it to be and need it to be, a passive sit back type of hour. This is a, hey, let's all chat with each other type of hour. So we're bringing together Indigenous practitioners who are on the screen with us today from across the Arctic and Pacific, and they are doing the work of building and shaping data and AI in their own communities. Their work is grounded in relationships, in responsibility, and in place, and it reflects navigating these technologies in real time. That's no light feat. So together they're going to share their perspectives rooted in practice and what they need, right, to sustain and build and grow through this crazy, complicated technological time we find ourselves in. So on behalf of the panelists, I want to be the first to thank the Indigenous Data Exchange and the Indigenous Data Alliance and all the other names, which I didn't write down as you were saying them, Stephanie, for creating opportunities to gather and to share knowledge. So as I mentioned, we're going to be in dialogue with each other today. We created a shared notes document that I will put in the chat. And Andrew, I forgot to ask you, does everyone see the chat? Is there a special place I need to put this?
Nope, you could just drop it straight into the chat.
Okay, cool. So that document is open. You should be able to access it and write in it. And we'll be looking there as we talk with the panelists to kind of create this multi-dimensional back and forth. Also, each of our panelists has offered to guide a portion of the conversation. So they'll kind of take a part of the conversation and guide us through that. And you'll be also interacting with us. Together as one group, we're going to build this shared understanding of what Indigenous AI and data is looking like today. So any questions at this point? Got panelists, we've got you all, we've got a doc. You can also use the chat if you need to and feel so compelled. Just help us if we forget to look at the chat to remind us that we need to look at the chat. All right, so to kick us off, I'm eager to hear, and I imagine you are as well, what these three panelists are building. So I'll ask each of you to share a little bit about who your work serves, what approaches you hope to see more of in the world, and then if you can, in one sentence, what's the problem you're actually trying to solve? I'll ask whoever's been awake the longest, which I believe is Lauren, because it's morning in Aotearoa, Lauren to kick us off, and then Para, and then Wenzel, to just take a few minutes to share what you've been building, what you hope to see more of in the world, and what's the problem you're actually trying to solve.
Okay, since I've been awake the longest, I have a couple of slides ready. Okay, so I wanted to share a couple of slides just to be able to visualize things. My name is Lauren Decker. I'm the Chief Science Officer at Polarctic. We're an oceanographic and data science company, and we're supporting informed decisions and informed decision making in the Arctic through environmental modeling with AI. So just to kick it off, the world from a different perspective, where you're looking at the North Pole and the South Pole. And this is a weird way to look at the Arctic, or the world in general. So I like to show the plot just to get people oriented weirdly. The Arctic Ocean is a relatively small ocean surrounded by land, which is populated by a lot of different people. There's a lot of countries, a lot of indigenous groups. And so there's a lot of activity up here. And it's just literally the polar opposite of Antarctica and the South Pole, where it's land surrounded by ocean. And there's just not as many, like you can see, just a lot more ocean than land for people to live on. And so this is just one of those interesting sort of spatial things of looking at what the Arctic is doing. In the Arctic, the winter and the summer do things. When it gets cold, the ocean freezes. And I've actually had a problem because I call it sea ice forecasting, but the word sounds weird. And so when you just say sea ice, a lot of people are being like, what? You mean you could like look at an ice cube? Like, no. Frozen ice, like icebergs. And so this is just one of my plots that I'm using to try and describe sea ice over a year changes, and it's like a heartbeat. One of the things with climate change is that this heartbeat is weakening. And so in the wintertime, it's not getting quite as big. And in the summertime, it's dramatically shrinking. And so being able to forecast and navigate this is one of the biggest just ocean hazards to be able to sort of keep your eye on so that people make informed decisions when traveling through the Arctic. So we do sea ice forecasting. And so like this is Alaska and this is Russia, and this is where a bunch of sea ice is already. And this is our forecast to be able to show over time, how is the ice going to grow? And then we also do a lot of habitat and fisheries. Where do you want your boat to go to be able to catch crabs, scallops, fish in general? So this one was a really fun one because this particular, this plot down here was actually like indigenous information from a local group that wanted to know if they could find scallops in a larger area than where they were currently fishing, so that they could build an economy around scallop fishing and then selling those scallops. And so being able to take some of their information and build a model around it, we were able to give them back a model of where they should go and look. And that was something that they were able to go and do and start, the process of actually like starting a new economy around looking at scallops. And so right now the Arctic is between a rock and a hard place. And I believe AI is one of the solutions to be able to help people make these informed decisions. Okay, I think I did that pretty fast.
Thank you, Lauren. Kara, would you be willing to share what you're building, what you hope to see more of in the world, and what problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, cool. Well, kia ora everybody, or morena, good morning from Aotearoa. And just, yeah, acknowledging the thanks that you've already given Vanessa for all of the hosts who are making this kōrero, this conversation possible. So I'm from Ngāti Raukawa ki te Tonga, Te Atiawa Whakarongotai, and Ngāti Tōrangatira. Those are the three tribes, the three iwi that I contribute to and descend from here in Aotearoa. So I don't have a cool slide show, but I'll just blame that on the fact that I've been awake not as long as Lauren, or just that I wasn't very prepared. But at the moment, I'm building an AI-powered actionable learning and knowledge system is the kind of thing that I'm calling it. So if you think about a traditional LMS, a traditional learning management system, but powered by AI and built on Māori data sovereignty frameworks and our traditional Māori protocol of how we treat knowledge with the respect and integrity that it needs. So especially for our traditional knowledge. So the reason that I built this is I've spent the last decade or so making a community initiative called Shoebox Christmas Aotearoa, which is a way for communities to show their kids, show the children in the communities that they've got their back through Christmas presents. Long story short, that became a national program and project, and I'm just volunteering, and I didn't have time to share the learnings that I had to equip communities to do the same thing. And when I went out and tried to figure out a way to do that, I realized I'm not an instructional designer, I'm not a teacher, I'm just someone who's solving a problem and now needs to transfer some of that knowledge, like you were talking about, Vanessa. Sharing that knowledge is often not, it's often a challenge for us for a bunch of different reasons. The tools that were out there to do that didn't treat my knowledge the way that I needed it to be. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know if AI models were going to be trained on it. It didn't understand my language, my Māori language. It wouldn't transcribe that properly. And ultimately, I just didn't have, what we call tino rangatiratanga, or kind of self-determination over that knowledge that I was giving. It felt like I was giving it to these tech platforms. And that kind of started this thinking of, our learning as Māori has been quite colonized. We all know the traditional ways of colonization that have occurred for many of our peoples. My nana's generation had our language beaten out of my family tree, quite literally. And now our kind of learning and knowledge sharing is being colonized by big tech, right? Like our people don't go in and give their attention and learning focus very intentionally now. We scroll on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook or Google YouTube Shorts or whatever. So that was kind of what I was trying to solve, what I am trying to solve, and what I've been building. So we've built this platform that takes your conversation, your video of you sharing that knowledge, transforms it into interactive learning exercises, all, like I said, on a foundation of Māori data sovereignty, using AI, and makes that learning actionable for the communities and the people who need it, without having to rely on these on big tech, who are effectively gatekeeping our knowledge, our learning, without us even knowing that those gates are there, because they can take that stuff away whenever they want, really. That's what I'm building. Who it's for are people who have knowledge to share, to create action, who care about the integrity of that knowledge, who care about the protection of it. People who are using it and getting started at the moment. We've got rongoā practitioners, so traditional Māori medicine practitioners, traditional carvers. I'm a carver, I use it. Some of my other carver friends use it. So those who know that their knowledge is important enough to take proper care of it is really who it's for. at the moment. And I hope that, like you were talking about as well, Vanessa, like over time we can make it more accessible to other Indigenous peoples. It's for Māori at the moment, the languaging and the protocol and the approaches that we've taken are all Māori values based and Māori protocol based. But I want to make that possible for other Indigenous peoples later on as well, or at least share what I've learned so that our cousins, our friends, our international Indigenous network can do the same. And I just want to, sorry, just acknowledge as well, Vanessa, that kōrero, that talk that you had. I mean, right now, I think it's even more important than ever for us for our Indigenous international communities to come together and to share what we know, because we all face so many similar challenges that it's not a smart reproduction of effort for us to all solve them in isolation, right? I think I answered all the questions. Wish I had a slideshow now.
Thank you, Para, and thank you for that that mandate that we should all come together and not work in isolation. And kudos to all of you who are here today to do just that. So Tapanu'u, Vensel, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you're building, who it's for, and what's the problem you're trying to solve.
Amazing. Thanks again, Vanessa, and the center for such an amazing opportunity and for putting this such an important event together. So a bit of myself, I'm a Samoan researcher working at the intersection of disaster resilience and modeling, while also applying Pacific Indigenous knowledge systems in some of the modeling that we do. What we're building with my supervisor here at the University of Auckland is essentially a decision support tool to not only assess what resilience to tsunamis look like at a community level, but also how tsunami can be managed within Pacific communities. Because what we've seen with our scoping literature review is that a lot of the existing models tend to infer what resilience looks like, especially because resilience is such a complicated phenomena or such a complicated metric, and it's often something that's thrown across all the high level UN and COP meetings, yet a lot of the practitioners can't even define what resilience means in practice. So the challenge that we were faced with at the start is how can we provide a definition for resilience that we can quantify in a way that not only uses advanced computational techniques, for in our case, we're exploring the use of agent-based modeling, and I'll provide some justification later on why we chose that specific methodology, but also incorporating modern tech with Pacific research frameworks. So we're applying Talanoa framework, which is a commonly used framework across the Pacific academia, which emphasizes open conversation between different parties that are involved in whatever ambition that is taking place. Why I'm building this is because prior to research, I worked as a transport engineer, and a lot of the consultations that we did was very consultant mindset. So we would come in with preconceived notions, and it sort of built an interest in me on how we can incorporate community feedback a lot better into the models and into the reports that we eventually use to design our models, but also to do the work or to build a certain road within different communities. And a bit of the reason why I got into it was growing up in Samoa. You see resilience every day. Communities already know how to respond, adapt, and support each other. But when you look at the systems that are used to make these decisions, such as planning tools, models, and funding frameworks, they don't often reflect the reality that we live on a daily basis. So there's quite a disconnect between what communities know and how decisions are made, not only within policy, but within different sectors such as engineering and planning. So that's the exact gap that I'm trying to address, starting with an assessment of resilience for tsunami disasters, and hopefully we can sort of drag that methodology across different hazards and eventually um, construct a system that can assess resilience for different hazards of coastal communities. Um, as an engineer, we're trained to think within systems, but through the PhD work that I've done and working with communities, I've started to see that systems and technical thinking is not everything. You really got to consider that human and community aspects. And as I mentioned before, what I'm building for is very clear. It's for my village, it's for my family, it's for the people I grew up around with, and growing up in islands really opened up my eyes to some of the disparities between the lived realities and what's being actually done within not only government but also private sector. So I guess to wrap it up, the goal is to bridge these two, to take lived community knowledge and embed it into systems that actually influence decisions. Because we don't have a knowledge problem, I would say, we have a systems problem. And if we don't fix that, we'll keep making decisions that don't match reality. Thank you.
I feel like that was what Lauren was also talking about. It's like there's a reality here, folks. You got to see the reality. What I heard from Lauren was AI might help us with protection. What I heard from Pero was that we might need better sharing through careful technology. And what I heard from Bensel was that technology needs to be a better scope to what we know. Anyone else with thoughts or reflections, feel free to put them in the chat to share what you are building in the shared notes document. And with that, I will pass to Para, who's going to help us understand the currents, the underpinnings of our work.
Kia ora. Yeah, so I think like it was a beautiful way to think about it, the way you've been talking about it, Vanessa, the ocean current that connects us, the ocean currents that connect us in this, across the global Indigenous network and family. We all have our own currents that we have to kind of navigate and our own pressures and both forwards and backwards, obviously when we're building these things or when we're trying to navigate them at home. So really keen, to just hear a little bit about how those how we're navigating those at the moment. So what currents are we working with or against? What's shaping our work right now? What constraints or pressures are we navigating? And where are we being pushed off course? So I might go over to you first, Lauren, and for you to kick us off, please.
Oh, but now I'm so distracted by Wenzel's quote here of it's not a knowledge problem, it's a systems problem.
I wrote that one down
so
too.
good. No, yeah. So, I mean, but just thinking about what's carrying you, what's pushing you, and it really is like the part that's pushing you is like seeing that there's knowledge there. And people are in the Arctic. There are boots on the ground in the Arctic of people that understand these things. And they have knowledge about what's going on and how do you support them to go farther. And so I just really like the concept that's really like, oh, that's a really great quote for how I feel like what I'm trying to do here is really just, yeah, okay. So, but I did actually like think about some of these other the actual questions too. Um, as a small business, it's always funding that always limits what you can and can't do. And so being able to figure out, especially for the US, which funding stuff is all up in the air right now, how do you fit into the big goals of the National Science Foundation to be able to continue to get grants to support this stuff? Do I look internationally? I've actually worked with Canada quite a bit. And I feel like international is starting to figure out how can you do the Inuit Circumpolar Council and being able to connect a whole bunch of different groups there. Another thing is I'm only a very small business. And so understanding what I can do and answering one person's question, like there's a very focused sort of trajectory on what's actually useful. And making stuff that's useful is one of my fundamental drivers too, of like, is anybody gonna use this? And if they aren't, I don't want to work on it. So being able to balance uh, funding needs and questions and what's actually useful, I think is very much one of my sort of how I'm thinking about this. Okay, I think that's. Did I answer the questions?
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Vincel, go over to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer along the same lines. I suppose it's a bit different when you're working as an, a researcher within, a university institution in comparison to, running your own small business. But in terms of funding, um, I would say it does determine a lot of the objectives and the scope that you work on, especially because a lot of the funding that you apply for has sort of prerequisites to get into. So you need to be from a specific background and you need to be interested in certain topics. But even when you get the funding, there's sort of guidelines that you have to sort of fit your thesis within. And I guess that's something to consider, especially for prospective researchers on the call. Find institutions. I was fortunate enough because my scholarship is being funded under Qayak, which does a lot of work around seismic resilience work, not only within Aotearoa but also around the Pacific. And a big part of that proposal process was justifying that tsunamis don't occur frequently enough in New Zealand. And so, in order to draw meaningful conclusions, we must look outside where we can, where, within the Pacific Islands where there've been a lot of, tsunami events. And so the justification of having a case study outside of the place where the institution is in is something that can be discussed and something that can be considered. Um, but also, as Lauren sort of mentioned, you want to create or build something that's actually useful. And a big part of being useful is that it's actually not only accessible to the community or to the people that you're building whatever system you're developing, but also it's there a big part of it should be active involvement from the start, from the stages where you're conceptualizing whatever your whatever idea you're doing, but to also when you're designing and developing and implementing it. I feel like that should be a big part of your job as a researcher. Yeah, if you compare it to, or if you were to sort of assess it from a Western consultant's point of view, it would seem inefficient. But there's a certain way of doing things within Pacific Indigenous ways, and that's something we're learning to respect, and we're learning to see the value from, because it's better to do it right once than to do it, sort of half the first few times, and then the time that you sort of set out for that particular task is actually a lot longer than what you penned it for. And I suppose, touching on what I said before, purpose is a big why, especially for Pacific researchers. A lot of our work, we acknowledge our positionality and how where we come from and sort of our lived experiences, and because each researcher we have our own uh, ways of thinking, we have our own upbringings, and that heavily influences uh, the literature that we pull out to write a certain research paper about. And it's also acknowledging uh, who you are and why you're doing that piece of research in the first place. Some food for thought.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, heaps of kai there, heaps of food. Um, I think, yeah, I mean, really interesting the that overlap of that same challenge right across both the small business and the kind of the research space. I think that you both kind of talked about the need for it to be that desirable, viable and feasible kind of triad thing, right? And I see my mate Will on the call, from a product perspective, that that's a big thing, right? It has to be useful. You have to be able to pay for it, and obviously it has to work technically. And I think when I was thinking about this, like that's a I guess it makes sense that it's a pretty common challenge, especially among Indigenous, right? Because we come into the tech space, I think, into the AI and the data space often from a problem or a values starting point, right? We're there to try to solve something we really care about. And to what you were saying, Vincent, about the it's not a knowledge problem, right? It's a system problem. That system of capitalism is also part of that problem, right? So the things that get paid for, the things that get funded, are the things that line up with capitalism, which are often not the problems or the value set that we're coming into these things from. And so I think for me, that's always been that's a real challenge. I mean, think like the shoebox Christmas thing that I was talking about. Like it took me kind of 7 or 8 years to go, okay, how am I going to actually make this sustainable? Because it costs money to run the tech platform, to try to pay these young people to do this work as well. Yeah, so I think that pressure is always going to be something that we have to navigate. Um, and another one that I'd be interested in hearing from you both about, that I come into often here is the thing around wariness of technology, right? So like obviously with AI and data and sovereignty and all of that, that's a big part of anything that we're doing. Um, but it can also create more hesitancy to even try to solve the problem. Um, and I think from a Maori perspective, like we forget sometimes that we have done the thing of grabbing new technology, using it to achieve our outcomes for a long time, right? All of us have. Every time we moved anywhere, any migrations that any of our peoples have been on or have come from, has involved finding and using new technology, right? Whether it was steel chisels arriving in Aotearoa for our carving for our meeting houses, or discovering the jade that we have down on the South Island to use as our chisels. Like we've done that for forever. Um, but we can be very hesitant about doing it now in the tech space, and that can sometimes stop us from even moving forward. And so we have this other system issue of underrepresentation, of course, which we probably all have. There's proportionally very few Māori in technology, right? So how do we actually bring our values into that industry at a scale big enough to change what gets funded? And I imagine it would be the same in the research area too. But yeah, before I ramble on too much, any thoughts from you, Lauren, maybe to start with on that barrier that we can have of even experimenting to adopt new technologies to solve some of these problems that are so important for us. Yeah, a little bit off script, sorry, but just in case there's
I think we should just all go off script and just have a good time with
awesome.
it, right? It's a conversation. If anybody else wants to jump in too. Okay, now I need to I'm writing notes down on just because I'm now changing my answers for the next questions. So
I can actually jump in just to buy you a bit of time, Lauren. just while I have the thought on my head.
you want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I can give a specific example from my end, especially because, as I mentioned before, the methodology that we're using is using agent-based, developing a hybrid model of GIS, but also ABM on a platform called Gamma. And the intention or the ambition at the start was to develop this model and also take it back to the islands, Samoa, and also do some work with some of the disaster management teams there. But when we initially approached them, we then realized that a lot of the systems that they had were still quite rudimentary. Some of the mapping that they did was even manual to an extent. And I guess a big lesson I got from that is transitioning. Um, and and especially when you're working with quite, with communities within developing countries such as PIC, you got to acknowledge that their technology systems may not be as advanced as some of the tools and some of the the some of the equipment that we have available to us, thankfully in New Zealand. And you can gauge that through conversation, but also putting yourself in their shoes. Um, and yeah, also pre-engagement is a big part of it as well. Making sure that you have enough time where you're actually engaging with them and looking at the different workflows that they have existing in the moment, and don't have an expectation of whatever cool new model that you're developing will come and replace everything that they've got going on, because these are professionals, these are their jobs, that they've been at it for a while. But yeah, just acknowledging those aspects before coming in with your big bold ideas.
Awesome. Thanks, Vincent.
So I think this is a really interesting space to think about data sovereignty and sovereignty of the output of the model and sovereignty of sort of the whole process. And I think this is one of the reasons I really like doing a small business approach, is that every part of that can be proprietary. And in a university setting, proprietary is a lot harder to do. And so that's one of the things that I really value about being a small business, is that I can work with a bunch of fishermen and they can tell me where they fish. And that's a weird thing. They do not want to tell you where they fish. And so being able to talk to people and say, I'm not a fisherman, I'm just trying to help you. I think it supports it a lot to be able to think about how to deal with sovereignty. And business has figured it out. And I really want universities to start being able to get there as well. And how do you do that level of sovereignty where data can be labeled as something that's not to be shared because it is sovereignly owned by some indigenous group. Anyway, that was my random thought on it, but
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And yeah, definitely as a fisherman as well, giving away your fishing locations, that's not a yeah, that's a big ask.
Mhm.
Um, cool.
Should I do
Yeah, I think so.
next
Yep.
question? Shall we continue on?
Let's roll.
Okay, so the next is, if resources were no object. So I was thinking about this a little bit. Of all the people, Pablo Picasso had a quote in the late 1960s where he said, "Computers are useless. They only give you answers." And and so I think that's a really important point, that questions are really what drive everything. And I was at a conference and someone said, what questions you ask of the Arctic will determine what kind of Arctic you will have. And I think that self-determination starts with Indigenous people asking a lot of questions that they're asking information and answers on. So you can't have one AI to rule them all. It doesn't work. You get lost in these average solutions. And actually, I have one hilarious picture that I have to show. That is this is my ethics slide. And so when you have AI that's trained on all the images on the internet, and you ask for salmon in a river, it thinks it knows what salmon looks like, and it looks like something out of a recipe, because there's a lot of salmon recipes on the internet. And so, like, these kinds of answers are just hilarious, but when they start getting smaller and more subtle, they become very dangerous. So I really like using this as my ethics slide just to say, yeah, it looks cute. It's clearly wrong. So how do you do it so that, because AI takes these average solutions, how do you make it so that diversity can build better, robust answers so that people don't get lost in statistics? And one of the questions that I was thinking about on what would you build is one of the big questions on this. And to sort of go back on to what we had just been talking about, a Arctic Research Commissioner, Nicole Nakush, had this idea of why don't we flip the script and give Native communities the power to choose proposals and fund them. And so that they would actually be the group that hands out the money instead of, an NSF group. And so they might be, a smaller organization that then has that power to be able to do that. And so I think that's one of the things that would be really fun to have built. It's not something that I could build specifically. I know that specifically I would be going on to what's the next question that I want to answer, which is, higher resolution sea ice forecasts. And so I'm gonna poke my co-hosts here in Per and Vincel. Do you guys have thoughts on if resources were no object? What would you build? What already exists that people aren't looking at? And what should exist and doesn't?
I've got a straightforward answer for the ethics question. I would say listen to ethics committee, and although it's quite long, read your 25-page ethics manuscript guidance, because it'll save you a lot of trouble down the line. In terms of what would I build if resources weren't a barrier, I suppose for my specific study, agent-based modeling is quite limited on social data that's available. How it differs from how geospatial models generally work is that you can sort of build social, or you can build computational links between objects that you've encoded. So essentially, something that's as qualitative as relationships between people, how they interact with each other. You can actually encode that into your agent-based model. So if the problem is that we have a lot of geospatial data on buildings and roads, because we got satellites in the air that's sort of sensing that out, but we don't have a lot of data about people, and that's a big challenge with any agent-based model, especially ones about communities that you're trying to develop. And if that wasn't a challenge, then my sort of field of research will be a lot easier to do. There'll be papers coming out every day or so. So I guess that's a quick answer from my side.
Kia ora. Yeah, I think I mean my original answer to this was a sovereign LLM here. So from a Māori perspective, a large language model, and I guess just acknowledging David's question or comment in the chat. Kia ora, bro. But I think after thinking more on it, maybe it's actually more about a series of sovereign small language models where we have that expertise in specific aspects of our of Te Ao Māori, of our Māori worldview, where we have these specialized models on those aspects of our what we know our truths to be, and that's probably more manageable because, like David said in his comment, like that's a big capital thing. If you're doing that from the ground up, obviously, that's a lot of time and money. Maybe the small language model is more affordable. I haven't dug deeply into that, but I think that's what I would build if resources were no object. And I guess acknowledging that resources, when we talk about that, it's not even just the money, like even the people expertise that we have to do that stuff, like the Māori who would need to be driving that are very scarce and limited as well. And again, are also already being funded by a capitalist system, to with money that we would not be able to match, unless all our tribes kind of combined and worked together on that stuff. The the stuff that exists that people don't see, I think that because I guess the other half of that conversation is that there are safe ways to use the systems and the technology that is out there already, right? Like obviously everything is always at risk of those organizations pulling their license terms, changing them, doing all that stuff. But that's true of everything that we use in the world, right? So I think there's also a balance that we can find uh, in using the things that are there safely, and sharing some of how to do that while we build our own things. Because the other reality is building that stuff is a long-term thing, right? For us to build our own systems, our own LLMs, our own network of small language models or whatever, we also need to solve the problems that we need to solve in the meantime. And so we need to share more how we do that safely using the things that exist. I often think, Trump's whole thing around the tariffs when he's like, you know what, America's going to make everything ourselves now. And you're like, well, that's not really feasible even for somewhere as big as America. Like it's definitely not feasible for the 5 million people in Aotearoa. So how do we find that middle ground in the meantime? Yeah.
I really like you bringing up that people are a resource and like
Mm,
we need to think about like if resources were no object, what are we building? But like people really are trying to think about um not just numbers of people, but being able to educate a bunch of the people in terms of, what AI is. I spent the beginning of my talk trying to teach people what the Arctic even looks like. So I think, yeah, that thinking of that sovereignty over LLMs and people as a resource. I really like bringing up having ethics as well for Wenzel when he was bringing up ethics and some of the metrics on understanding what is ethical. That's so hard. So I feel like if there was no limit on money and time and data and people, we would figure out ethics, right? This is okay. I believe that means that we are going to transition into the last the last section there
Yeah,
with
and
Dr.
I
Wenzel.
believe that's my part. So the last bit, we're gonna go over stakes, and what happens if we get whatever piece of work that we're doing on wrong or incorrect. So I wanted to ground this uh, on my research and on where I come from. So with my work on tsunami resilience, I've seen that uh, going through the literature, there's been a lot of models that are technically strong, but they don't really reflect how communities actually behave. Modelers, due to not only data constraints but also funding constraints, tend to simplify systems in order to come up with something that they can issue out. But when more often than not, when you simplify things, they lose a lot of details and they misrepresent reality. And this is quite critical, especially when you're deploying models for something that that determines whether a family within a hazard zone is getting money or not, or is getting relief support or not. And so for me, the stakes uh, are not abstract, and it's often better to over to overshoot than to undershoot. So I guess I'd like to pose a question to the crowd. What happens if our models do get our assumptions wrong, or what happens if what we're building doesn't live up to expectations? How do we deal with that? Yeah. And I'll pass the baton on to my fellow co-hosts just to get the conversation started.
just think about how to start off the conversation here as
I might have done it dirty because that's not exactly what what we had bullet pointed, but
no, this
going
is good.
yeah.
Well, and I think it's really interesting too to think about what's at risk if Indigenous communities are not shaping AI, and that, it's going to be one big Google platform that runs it all. And we lose a lot of information, and suddenly we become this very big but very fragile system. Even now, like AWS has a global outage, and suddenly a whole lot of people can't work during the day because everybody's using the same thing. And when everybody uses the same thing, the system is too fragile. You need that ability to like keep evolving in different directions, and democratizing AI is one of the ways. And so everybody loses out when Indigenous communities can't put in their own models.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's an excellent point of the consequences when there's a lack of redundancy within the system. We need to, decentralize, where we get our models and our data from.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think should I jump in now, Lauren? Cool. The easiest example that I show often, I do these community walk-in sessions up where I'm from, where people can come in and just have a muck around with AI and learn some of the basics of what it does and how to use it safely and what considerations they kind of should be making. And one of the things I often show them is like I asked, I think it was Gemini or whatever, the Nano Banana or whatever their video generation model is, to draw a marae, one of our traditional meeting houses. And it drew this, to make it, sorry, to make a video of it. And it made a video of this weird cross between like a yurt and maybe like a Malaysian temple, which looks nothing at all like our traditional meeting houses. Um, and but it was like a really high production quality video, right? It wasn't the Will Smith eating spaghetti in 2021 thing of his hands and becoming spaghetti. And so the point of me showing that was that I kind of then go, so this is what happens at the moment. This is what AI, this is how AI interprets our traditional knowledge, our mātauranga Māori, our identity. Our meeting houses are a big part of our identity. And so that's a bit silly now, but fast forward to 5 years' time, when maybe all of the kids' animated movies are made using Nano Banana or the underlying models or whatever. And if that's what it thinks a marae or a traditional meeting house looks like, and a big production house in the States is building, I don't know, Dora the Explorer, and 20 million kids are going to see that movie, and Dora visits Aotearoa and visits the native people in Aotearoa and goes to a meeting house or a marae, that becomes the common knowledge, right? So that then becomes the world's view of what the native people of New Zealand have as their meeting houses. So that's the like when you call them hallucinations or whatever, which is a ridiculous word because it's way more impactful than that. We can be like the common knowledge basket is being reshaped and rewritten without our input and without the actual truth, because it will guess our truth, obviously. So I think that's one of the big stakes, and so that then sparks a pretty big conversation of obviously how do we mitigate that? And there's kind of there's the options, and some people have this school of thought of we should be flooding these mainstream big tech models with our actual truths so that it knows it. There's that school of thought, and then there's obviously the other school, or another school of thought, which is probably what I was talking about before. How do we build our own models? Whether a distributed set or swarm or whatever of them, or one sovereign LLM for Māori. And I don't know what the right approach is, but I guess I do know that those are the stakes. Those two, that impact is very real and is already there, right? That's what it will show you if you ask show me what a New Zealand meeting house, native New Zealand meeting house looks like. Yeah. And then I guess the other thing that's at stake, if I go back to my just not using it state, so things like Shoebox Christmas, last year there were about 17,000 kids who got Christmas presents because of Shoebox Christmas, who a lot of them would have missed out otherwise. If I hadn't been able to use AI to like outsize our resource impact, like we were talking about before, right? Like the people resource impact, that wouldn't have happened. So we need to find a way to use it safely, either by building our own or by making sure the ones that are there behave the way they should.
Yeah, that's really awesome, Cordero. Pera, thanks for that. Yeah, it's just really important to be cognizant of how AI currently represents, different aspects of our culture, especially because if this is sort of the front-facing, introduction that people from outside they see within, then really becomes a problem, and in the future on how we present on how or our reputation to the rest of the world. And yeah, also it was real good to hear the options that you said on how to mitigate that, and I suppose that ties into the second bit of this section of the session is how how do we mitigate what gets lost or what gets extracted and what gets locked out.
So I think I'm gonna answer that question by transitioning from what Para was just talking about, and that we need to have and like if we had no concern over resource, building authoritative sources of truth that people actually trust, and being an authority figure on something where when you're making a new Dora the Explorer episode and you're going into a particular area, you know that you need to go and ask their, support crew, their people, their LLM, whatever it is, in order to build it. And I'm just thinking about this. I have two teenage boys who spend a lot of time on their phone and startlingly trust very little on their phone. And they always look at it like, haha, that's fake. Haha, that's fake. And it's interesting to think about the next generation growing up in this era where they don't trust things inherently anymore. And it's strange. I don't know if it's universal, if it's just my kids, but being able to build systems where they can go to authoritative locations on the internet so that information doesn't get lost, so that they know where to go to be able to find something. And if we don't do that, I do think people will get lost in on the internet and consumed into some big single AI and get locked out. And people like my children won't be able to go and do research on them or understand them, or the next makers of the next kids show are gonna go to the wrong spot. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's that whole, how do we build something that people can trust?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really important part of the conversation is, um, yeah. And even if we do develop it, how can we get, the wide majority to accept it? Um, some the very extreme example comes to mind. I was browsing through the crypto market and I came across something called Roadcoin. It was an initiative by the fella that owns I think OpenAI. So essentially, it's his take on sort of creating. I might be butchering the terminology because I'm not a crypto person, but I read like a quick article about it. Creating like objective identities of people by not taking the common biometrics, which would be your fingerprint, but they would scan your irises, and then they would encode it into this dystopian looking orb that they had. But yeah, it's I thought it was quite innovative. Didn't really read much into it afterwards, but there are initiatives around the world that's looking to solve that exact problem on how we can sort of ground truth the content that we see, or sort of the data that exists at the moment.
I think this is the biggest and the hardest question, right? Like how do we mitigate it? Because again, like all of the things we've talked about, like there's many layers to this challenge. But I think ultimately we need to do just exactly what you've both talked about, which is have those trusted sources, whether they are models, whether they are, and that's ultimately what I'm trying to make with Kaha Create, right? On a very small scale, a trusted repository, a trusted basket of knowledge that our people know is there, is safe, and is not, doing the stuff we've all just talked about, training US for-profit organizations ultimately. And I think to do that, there's again like there's a pipeline challenge of for Māori in particular. Like we don't have enough Māori in the tech industry. We're about like 4%-ish, probably more now that tech roles look so different with AI there. But if we don't address that, we're not going to have the technical builders to do that building, right? We don't have heaps of people like my mate Will on the call, who's a Māori UX designer. We don't have heaps of the designers there, the technicians, and we also don't have a whole lot of the knowledge repositories there and able to be used online either. So that's a very big multi-layered challenge, but I think that's the only way to solve it. And like all of those things, right? You start small and you go, how do we chip away at it? And some of there are people working away on like what is our language, specifically our te reo Māori language, small language model look like. And I think if we replicated that same approach across the different aspects of our indigeneity, and that can be true for wherever, that's probably one way to do it. But again, that means, and it's we in Aotearoa we have this urban drift thing where our people moved out from their hometowns out into the big cities because that's where the work was. The same things happened with the few tech, to a lot of the few tech practitioners we have, right? They migrate out to the companies who can pay them the most. And I'd never say this about my people, but I read a quote about all of the smartest people in the world are trying to figure out how to make it easier to order pizza. That's effectively what a lot of us are doing, instead of going, how do we, understand how the Arctic ice is going to move? How do we make sure our communities are resilient in the faces of tsunami? How do we make sure that our children and our grandchildren have access to the stories from their meeting house and they are true and accurate, and only the right people have access to that because we don't want it to be everywhere. Yeah, I think we just have to start small and slice it up and get doing it.
Definitely. Thanks for ending our section. I guess I'll pass it back to Vanessa.
Thank you, guys. You've taken us on a journey. I have a lot of really half-readable notes right here. So, I wanted to give you guys each the opportunity to make a closing statement or to pose a question to the people here. We've had a lot of great conversation in the chat. And so there's a lot of richness there. And then we also have time for a Q&A at the end after you guys give just a 1 minute closing thought. And if you feel like you've said enough, we can put a pin in it and move to hearing from people who are here. I will go with Pencil, then Laura, and then Para.
Some of these comments in here, it's just, yep.
Just a quick wrap up on my end. I guess from my own personal experience of research, but also, also with industry prior to that. Whenever you're developing systems that incorporates advanced technologies like artificial intelligence or whatever, computational technique you're using. I think it's, as a Pacific researcher, it's always important that your models are contextualized to the lived realities of your community, and there are so many different ways you can implement that in practice, through long engagement periods prior to even conceptualizing what that model would look like, to living within the communities and actually immersing yourself with the workflows and what individuals do on a day-to-day basis. But not only that, it's also important to apply Pacific research frameworks, not for the sake of having it included in your references and to get into a particular journal, but to make it a lot more inclusive, and to also bring the spotlight into a lot of the indigenous knowledge that is fading. And if you really dive deep into the literature, there's some gems out there that are undiscovered. And I guess the last bit would be to take a holistic approach, or acknowledge that that people are connected to infrastructure, and they're connected to environment, and as a researcher, do your due diligence to acknowledge that these interdependencies exist, and it'll make your research a lot more practical and applicable in that way.
Yeah, apply appropriate frameworks, immerse yourself in lived realities. Those are great take-home points for us. Lauren, do you have something that you want to close us out with?
I talk for a minute, but I'm still excited about the possibilities of leveraging AI to forward the interests and needs of a lot of different diverse people. I think building AI models, Pair's got a template for being able to leverage your data and then teach people with it. And I know my grandmother was a Yupik speaker, and that was, beaten out of the family a long time ago. And so my mom never learned it, and I never learned it. And I think being able to leverage a lot of this, there's still a lot of Yupik speakers out there, and being able to build and educate a lot of people in this is something that we can keep using and keep leveraging AI to help, and build more on. And so I did want to bring up that there are some really great data management principles that can be applied to a lot of this. A lot of people have heard of FAIR, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And that's a very open data, everybody's happy, let's all share data framework. And then there's a response to it called CARE, which is collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And I think being able to follow a lot of this is just sort of some basic guidelines on how to move forward, is a good way of being able to move forward in a positive way.
Loved your phrase, keep using it as help. Keep using AI as help. How can AI be used by us to help us in our needs? And I really appreciate that framing, that this tool has potential benefit as well as potential harms. And we talk a lot about the harms, but I appreciate all of you for being willing to explore potential benefits as well. Recognizing what David has also shared in the chat is like, it has to be tuned, it has to be tailored, and then, yeah, adopting different frameworks, building from a different place like CARE. Thank you for that, Lauren. Was there anything else that you wanted to share in closing? No, good. Okay, good. I couldn't tell if I cut you off or not. Okay, Para, can you take us out with your closing thoughts, and then we'll move to the room and any Q&A that people want to go through.
Yeah, cool. I think I mean really just echoing what Lauren and Vincent have both said, like and if I think about it from the context of where I live and sit and contribute to and descend from and receive from, like I don't like thinking about things from a deficit sort of state, but like Maori are overrepresented in a bunch of unfortunate statistics, right? Health wise, all of the stuff that a lot of Indigenous people share. That's not news to any of us probably, but the like what that means is that we have to work extra hard with extra less to move forward at the same pace to get to that point of surviving or thriving, ideally thriving. Um, and so we have to figure out ways to do that with the little that we have. And the rest of the world, and when we talked about the system of capitalism and the impact that has on who's building what, we've got extra work to do to try to thrive, right? And so AI can help us do that. Again, in my specific examples, like I just wouldn't be able to give the help that my communities ask me for without AI, because I'm also, working, I'm looking after my whānau, my kids and my family, my direct family, my wider family, the iwi aspects, the tribal aspects that I contribute to. So we're already stretched really, really thin. And so it's easy to be anti-AI in all shapes and forms and say, because I can't use AI, in a way that reflects me, I'm not going to use it. But if you start small and you go, what's the thing I'm trying to use it to do? And I can figure out how to do that safely, including our different frameworks for treating data and for considering data, like you're talking about, Lauren. And like Māori we've spent a lot of time on that through our different Māori data sovereignty avenues and forums. Then you can figure out ways to do it. And you're always going to have to make trade-offs, and the trade-off might be I'm going to be paying a for-profit company like AWS or Microsoft or whoever. But it's going to mean that, yeah, I don't know, 17,000 kids get a Christmas present, or 10,000 students get to learn the language that was beaten out of their whakapapa, their family tree. But you have to figure out how to use it safely. And so I think, yeah, just like you said, moving forward positively, but understanding what the guardrails are for that use case, slicing it off small, that's really the only way to do it. We're not going to solve AI respecting our Indigenous peoples as a big blob of system change, but we can do it slice by slice.
The big blob and what Lauren called the very large and very fragile won't get us there, but the small, as I think all of the panelists have said, the culturally appropriate, the immersed, and as David in the chat and Andrew and Andre have also said, there's all this nuance to what we could build. So I pass it back to either Andrew or Jewel. I'm not sure who wants to run the Q&A, but thank you to the panelists for what you've shared, both personally, professionally, all of the years of experience that brought you to this moment. Thank you to your past self, to your family. Thank you.
Honestly. All right, yeah. There's a lot of combo in the chat. Good stuff. People joking around, myself, and then responding to different commentary in there as well. So very robust discussion already in the chat. But if anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question or add their own sort of 2 cents, 10 cents to the conversation, feel free. We did scope out an hour and a half for this session, which I think is perfect timing so far. But yeah, go for it. I'm going to pause for a couple seconds, and if anyone wants to jump in there, go for it. If not, I can hop in and sign us off. Okay, if not, no worries. I'm just gonna, so if I rewatch this webinar, I'm gonna think about it like everyone sitting around a campfire and y'all just kind of sitting on like one log, just kind of talking back and forth, and the rest of us just like checking out the glow of the fire. Because that's really how this conversation felt today, and I thought that was really great. Even if we needed slides, we can bring a projector and a screen. So this is an awesome conversation. So yeah, to sign us off, first off, thank you for kind of closing us out for the spring and our series of webinars. I think this is an awesome one to end on. And I think for this, I speak for the team on that one as well here. So love the questions that y'all came up with prior, and then the discussion that just kind of developed out of that, and how even Lauren was saying, I need to shift my response based on what we were just talking about to how I would respond to it now, and just thinking off the top. So that was great. I thought it was great. Yes, so for everyone, thank you for joining. This is our final webinar of the spring 2024 or 2026 session. Wow, going back a couple of years. Spring 2026 sessions. We will kick off again in the fall. Right now we're sort of identifying the week of August 26th to start up again, but we don't have anything scheduled, so we'll keep you posted. When you signed up and registered for this webinar, you selected if you want to be keep in touch with us, and then we'll be posting those up. We also have some social pages, our collaboratory page and USIDSN Instagram accounts if you want to follow us on there as well. I'm sorry I don't have that link at the ready, but it's just off the top of my head. So yeah, thank you all for the awesome conversation, very chill conversation today. And I will end there.